Hello and welcome to the interview. The Turkish leader Recep Tayyip Erdogan once said, "Democracy is like a bus ride. Once I get to my stop, I'm getting off." Prophetic words when you look at the massive purge now underway following the failed coup. My guest today tried to keep the passengers on the bus. Marc Pierini was the EU ambassador to Turkey from 2006 to 2011. He spent much of his time crisscrossing the country, overseeing EU aid, and trying to bring Turkey closer to European norms and practices. He's now a visiting scholar at the Carnegie Foundation for International Peace in Brussels. Marc Pierini joins me today from the southern French city of Marseille. Thank you so much for being our guest on the interview. I wanted to start by asking you, does this purge bury all hope that Turkey will join the European Union one day?
Hopefully not, but we don't know where the purge will stop. Obviously, if we look at the July 15 failed coup, we have to realize as foreigners that it is a huge shock for the Turkish state and for the Turkish public in general, way beyond just the AKP voters. All Turks thought that military coups were something of the past. And if we look at the past 6-8 years, 80%, 85% of all Turks in the polls said, we don't want to see that anymore. So huge shock. And of course, a state that has seen its air force bombarding the parliament has to do something about it. But in the night of the coup, even before the outcome of the coup was clear, Western leaders, Chancellor Merkel, President Hollande, President Obama, all supported legitimate institutions in Turkey. What they said in addition was that whatever corrective measures are taken later on, they should be taken within the rule of law. And this is what we are observing now.
But to pick up on that point about Western reactions, I mean, European reactions and Chancellor Merkel in particular, I mean, it strikes me that they're fairly muted now, given the sheer scale of this purge and the number of people who've been arrested. Are you surprised that that the reaction isn't more forceful from European capitals? And what does that say about European thinking about Turkey?
Well, I think it tells you of the perplexity of European leaders. They've said very clearly what their position was at the beginning, but now we've seen in the almost on the 2 weeks since the coup, that the purge is going way beyond the military. Some 40-45% of all generals and admirals have been dismissed, which is huge in itself, but it's now going into media, judiciary, business even, etc. So we don't know where it's going to stop. And of course, for foreigners, even when I was living there as a head of diplomatic mission, it was very difficult to assess who was a member of this Gulen society. That is something which is very much in the forefront in Turkey and very difficult to grasp for foreigners.
So you're saying essentially European leaders simply don't know what to do. They don't know how to react or what to do next.
Well, they will keep their position that this is to be done within the rule of law, but the rule of law itself is being changed because you have an emergency law and you have emergency decrees that are being taken day after day. The Turkish government claims that this is exactly as the emergency law in France. It's not. The guarantees for the detainees, for example, are not the same. So there is a huge perplexity and waiting to see what's going to happen, where it's going to stop. You're
not entirely surprised, though, by the purge, I imagine, given that you saw various tendencies when you were the ambassador to Turkey. Just tell us a little bit about the warning signs that you saw.
Well, I would say that since 2011 and then the presidential election in 2014, we have seen more frequent signs of authoritarianism, of infringement with press freedom, with judiciary independence. You cannot put a date on this. This has been very gradual, bit by bit. But clearly, the overall objective before the coup was, and it was a declared objective during the presidential campaign of the spring 2014, to arrive at an executive presidency. And after President Erdogan was elected with 52% of the vote, he said very clearly, and the current prime minister also said when he was appointed a few weeks ago, that we now need to align the constitution on the reality. So in other words, you have an executive presidency in the facts, but you don't have it in the law, and they want to transition from one to the other. And then comes the coup attempt, which, of course, is a huge destabilization to the state, to the army. This is being fixed, and it's, in a way, legitimate. But obviously, to all foreign observers, certainly to Western observers, it's a situation where the leadership is pushing its advantage. And you will remember the statement by the president on the morning after that dreadful night where so many people died. He said, "This coup is a gift from God. It will allow us to purge the state."
So essentially, nobody can stop Erdogan either within the country from becoming an executive president, and no one outside the country has the will or the tools of pressure to stop him either. Is that the bottom line?
Well, I would give you two answers to this. Within Turkey, you have a sort of rallying around the president, which is way, way beyond the 49-50% that the AKP gets in legislative elections, or even the 52% the president gets in a direct presidential election. So you have a phenomenon by which fear of chaos, and obviously if the coup had succeeded, it would be real chaos. So people are rallying behind the state institutions. So that's one thing, and the president knows that. On the outside, obviously, Western leaders have called for respect of the rule of law, and they are
but they're not
entirely reassured at this point.
But they're not getting that, so they're not really trying. Either
they're not
trying
getting
very
that,
hard.
but we only at the end of the second week into the coup. At the same time, you have intangible realities. That is, the economic anchor of Turkey is the EU. Exports, tourism, technology, direct investment, this is basically the EU with no alternatives. And the security anchor of Turkey, when the going gets real rough, is the US and NATO. So you cannot change these deep realities overnight, and therefore, one way or the other, Turkey has to entertain a relationship with the EU, whatever the format is, and listen to the EU as well.
You're talking about those deep realities in terms of business ties and security ties, but do you think President Erdogan is perhaps, from his end, trying to move away from those ties, because, of course, he's going to be meeting the Russian President Vladimir Putin in the next few weeks? That's a very significant visit, and it could signal a reorientation of Turkey's foreign policy, could it not?
It could. On the 9th of August in St. Petersburg, when they meet, you have two things happening. One is obviously fixing the drama of the past few months, since the end of November, when a Russian military jet, and a Russian military helicopter were destroyed by the Turkish armed forces. So that's one thing. I mean, the jet was destroyed by Turkish armed forces and the helicopter by rebels supported by Turkey. That's one thing, and that will allow Turkey to resume cooperation with Russia. Tourism will come back, exports will resume, construction contracts, counter-terrorism cooperation, and so on. The rest is the unpredictable. Whether Russia, which is, of course, very interested, as we've seen for 2 or 3 years now, in hurting the EU and the Western world in general in whatever way they can, they could make a diplomatic offer to Turkey if they so decide. And that will be a test. But
and
again, the Turkish foreign minister said there is no competition between the two.
Part of that political offer could be some kind of agreement on the future of Bashar al-Assad. And if that happens, then obviously there's a big risk for Turkey, which is losing credibility with rebel groups in Syria and also losing credibility with its allies in the Gulf states. So it could be a very risky shift for Turkey, couldn't it?
It could, but the political reality on the ground, meaning the western part of Syria, which is under regime control, is that militarily Russia has the upper hand, and diplomatically there and in the talks with the US or the talks in Geneva, Russia has the upper hand for the moment. So it's hard to conceive that there will be a genuine reconciliation between Ankara and Moscow without Ankara accepting Moscow's thesis that the Syrian regime has to remain and that one way or the other, at least in the short term, Bashar al-Assad himself has to remain in place.
Yes, so possibly a price to pay for any rapprochement with Moscow. We'll have to leave it there. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, but thank you so much, Marc Pierini, for being our guest on the interview. Marc Pierini, visiting scholar at the Carnegie Foundation and former